The moment Sarah whispered those two simple words, "Look at me," everything changed for Daniel. What began as the most uncomfortable day of his life transformed into the beginning of something beautiful. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you want to know how a reluctant wedding guest found unexpected love in the most ordinary place, stay with me until the end. And if this story touches your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that remind us of the magic hiding in everyday moments. Daniel Matthews stood in front of his bathroom mirror, fumbling with his tie for the 5th time. At 42, he should have mastered this skill decades ago, but Melissa had always tied his ties. 5 years since her passing, and he still hadn't properly learned. His fingers trembled slightly as he made another attempt, acutely aware that he was already running late for his cousin's wedding. "Dad? Are you still not ready?" Emma's voice called from downstairs. At 16, his daughter had become remarkably self-sufficient, sometimes more adult than he was. "Grandma just texted. She and Grandpa are already at Aunt Lisa's house." "Almost done, sweetheart," Daniel called back, finally managing a passable nod. He studied his reflection, the slight gray at his temples, the faint lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when Melissa was alive. He looked tired. He felt tired. Emma appeared in the doorway, already dressed in the outfit she'd be wearing to her friend's house where she'd be staying while Daniel attended the wedding. "You look nice, Dad," she said, her expression softening. "Mom would think so too." Daniel's throat tightened. "Thanks, Em." He cleared his throat. "You sure you don't want to come? I'm sure Lisa wouldn't mind." Emma rolled her eyes. "Dad, we've been over this. I barely know Aunt Lisa, and Kayla's having this sleepover she's been planning forever." She hesitated. "Besides, you need to get out more. Meet people." "I meet plenty of people at work," Daniel protested weakly. "Coworkers don't count," Emma said with the certainty only teenagers possess. "You need friends. Maybe even." She wiggled her eyebrows suggestively. "Emma Matthews, don't you dare finish that thought," Daniel warned, but he was smiling. "I'm perfectly content with things as they are." It wasn't entirely true, but it was easier than admitting the alternative. The thought of attending this wedding alone filled him with dread, all those couples slow dancing, the bouquet toss, the constant reminders of what he'd lost. But Lisa was Melissa's cousin, and family was family. He'd promised to be there. As Daniel drove Emma to her friend's house, she fiddled with the radio, settling on a pop station that made Daniel wince. "One more thing," she said as they pulled up to Kayla's house. "Mrs. Rodriguez from next door texted me. She's going to the same wedding. She said to tell you she can give you a ride if you want." Daniel frowned. "Sarah Rodriguez? From 412? Yeah, the one with the awesome garden. She's really nice, Dad. She always asks how I'm doing in school when I see her." Daniel vaguely recalled a petite woman with dark hair who had moved in about 8 months ago. They'd exchanged pleasantries a few times, but he couldn't recall having an actual conversation with her. "I didn't know she knew Lisa. She said she works with Lisa's fiancé at the hospital. She's a nurse or something." Emma gathered her overnight bag. "You should text her. It's stupid for both of you to drive separately." Before Daniel could protest, Emma was out of the car, waving goodbye and disappearing into her friend's house. He sat there for a moment, considering. It would be less awkward to arrive with someone he knew, even if just barely. And it would save gas. With a sigh, he pulled out his phone and composed a text to the number Emma had saved in his contacts as "Nice Neighbor Lady." 20 minutes later, Daniel stood awkwardly on Sarah Rodriguez's front porch, second-guessing his decision. The door opened before he could reconsider, and there she was, not at all what he remembered. Sarah was about his age, with warm brown eyes and a smile that immediately put him at ease. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she wore a deep blue dress that complemented her olive skin perfectly. "Daniel, right?" she said, extending her hand. "I'm so glad you texted. I was dreading driving alone." Her handshake was firm, her hand small in his. "Thanks for offering," he managed. "I didn't realize we were going to the same wedding." "Small world," she said, grabbing a small clutch from a table by the door. "I work with Mark in the pediatric ward. He's a great guy, Lisa's lucky." She locked her door and turned to him with a conspiratorial smile. "Between us, I was a little relieved when Emma said you were going too. I always feel awkward at these things when I don't know many people." As they walked to her car, a sensible blue sedan, Daniel felt some of his anxiety ease. There was something comforting about Sarah's straightforward manner. "So, pediatric nurse?" he asked as they pulled away from their neighborhood. She nodded. 15 years now. "I love it, though some days are harder than others." She glanced at him. "Emma mentioned you work in architecture?" "Architectural engineering, yeah. Not as exciting as saving kids' lives." Sarah laughed. "Some days it's more like wiping noses and giving out stickers. But I love it." She paused. "Emma seems like a wonderful girl. She talks about you a lot." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "She does? When I see her getting the mail or waiting for the bus. She told me you designed your own house." "That's pretty impressive." "It was a project Melissa and I started together," Daniel said, surprised at how easily his late wife's name came to his lips. "My wife," he added unnecessarily. Sarah nodded, her expression gentle. "Emma mentioned she passed away a few years ago." "I'm sorry." The simple acknowledgement, free of the usual awkward platitudes, was refreshing. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Sarah spoke again. "I lost my husband too. Car accident, 8 years ago." Daniel looked at her, seeing her in a new light. "That's why you moved here? For a fresh start?" She smiled sadly. "Something like that. Miguel and I were living in Chicago. After he died, I stayed for a while, but eventually, everything there just reminded me of what I'd lost. My sister lives about 20 minutes from here, so when the position at Memorial opened up, it seemed like a sign." "Does it get easier?" Daniel asked before he could stop himself. "Moving forward?" Sarah considered this as she navigated onto the highway. "Not easier, exactly. Different. The grief changes shape. Some days it's barely noticeable, and others it hits you out of nowhere." She glanced at him. "But yes, you learn to build a life around it. At least, that's what I'm trying to do." By the time they arrived at the vineyard where the ceremony was being held, Daniel felt more at ease than he had in months. There was something about Sarah's presence that was both calming and invigorating, like she understood parts of him without him having to explain. The ceremony was beautiful, set against rolling hills covered in grapevines. Lisa looked radiant, and her new husband couldn't take his eyes off her. Daniel found himself genuinely happy for them, rather than dwelling on his own loss as he'd feared. During the reception, Daniel and Sarah sat at a table with several of Mark's colleagues from the hospital. Sarah seemed to know everyone, introducing Daniel with such natural ease that he soon found himself engaged in conversation about everything from hospital renovations to the best hiking trails in the area. "You're good at this," he murmured to her during a lull in the conversation. "At what?" she asked, taking a sip of her wine. "Making people feel comfortable. Connecting." She smiled, a hint of shyness in her expression. "Part of the job, I guess. Pediatric nurses have to be good at putting anxious people at ease." As dinner concluded and the dancing began, Daniel felt the familiar knot of anxiety return. This had always been the hardest part for him at social events since Melissa died, watching couples sway together on the dance floor, a stark reminder of his solitude. Sarah must have sensed his discomfort. She leaned closer, her voice low. Want to escape for a bit? I saw a terrace overlooking the vineyard. Grateful, Daniel nodded, and they slipped away from the reception hall. The terrace was empty, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. The air was cool and fragrant with the scent of roses from the garden below. Better? Sarah asked, leaning against the stone balustrade. Much, Daniel admitted. Thanks for the rescue. Weddings can be overwhelming, especially when. She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to. Yeah. Daniel looked out over the vineyard, the neat rows of vines stretching toward the horizon. Melissa loved to dance. She'd be out there right now, probably trying to get me to join in. Sarah smiled. Miguel too. He had this ridiculous salsa move that embarrassed me to no end, but he didn't care. He just loved the joy of it. They would have liked each other, I think, Daniel said, surprising himself with the thought. I think so too. Sarah turned to face him fully. Can I ask you something, Daniel? He nodded, curious. Do you ever feel guilty? For having moments when you're happy? When you almost forget, just for a second? The question hit him like a physical blow, not because it was intrusive, but because it articulated something he'd never been able to put into words. All the time, he admitted. Like I'm betraying her memory somehow. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. I spent 2 years feeling that way. Then one day, my sister said something that changed everything for me. She said, Miguel didn't die so you could stop living too. The words hung in the air between them, profound in their simplicity. Your sister sounds wise, Daniel said finally. She has her moments, Sarah agreed with a small smile. It took me a long time to really hear what she was saying, though. To understand that honoring Miguel's memory didn't mean clinging to grief. It meant living fully, the way he would have wanted. From inside, the muffled sounds of the reception continued, laughter, music, celebration. Life going on. I haven't been very good at that, Daniel confessed. Living, I mean. I go to work, I take care of Emma, but sometimes it feels like I'm just going through the motions. I know that feeling, Sarah said softly. But you're here tonight. That's something. Before Daniel could respond, the doors to the terrace opened, and a group of laughing guests spilled out, breaking the intimate moment. Sarah and Daniel exchanged a look, part regret, part understanding, and rejoined the reception. As the evening progressed, Daniel found himself relaxing more. He chatted with relatives he hadn't seen in years, shared stories about Emma, and even laughed genuinely at his uncle's terrible jokes. Through it all, he was aware of Sarah's presence nearby, like an anchor in unfamiliar waters. When the DJ announced the last few songs of the night, Daniel was helping his elderly aunt find her misplaced purse. By the time he returned to the main hall, the lights had dimmed, and couples swayed to a slow, romantic ballad. He scanned the room for Sarah and found her standing near the edge of the dance floor, watching the dancers with a wistful expression. Something about her solitary figure stirred something in Daniel, a recognition, a kinship, and something else he wasn't ready to name. Before he could second-guess himself, he crossed the room to her side. Would you like to dance? He asked, his heart pounding as if he were 16 again. Sarah looked up at him, surprise and something warmer flickering in her eyes. Are you sure? Daniel wasn't sure, not about dancing, not about anything. But for the first time in 5 years, he wanted to try. I'm probably terrible at it, he warned. Melissa always said I had 2 left feet. Sarah's smile was radiant. That's okay. I'm not exactly a professional myself. As they moved onto the dance floor, Daniel felt a moment of panic. He placed his hand awkwardly at Sarah's waist, keeping a respectful distance between them. They moved stiffly at first, out of sync and self-conscious. Then Sarah looked up at him, her expression open and vulnerable. Look at me, she whispered, holding his gaze. "Just look at me, and forget about everyone else." Something in her words, in the gentle command of them, broke through Daniel's anxiety. He focused on her face, the warmth in her eyes, the slight curve of her lips, the tiny freckle near her temple, and felt his body relax. They began to move more naturally together, finding a shared rhythm. "Better?" Sarah asked softly. "Much," Daniel replied, surprised to find it was true. For the first time in years, he was dancing without feeling like he was betraying Melissa's memory. Instead, he felt a quiet gratitude, for the love they had shared, and for this unexpected moment of connection with someone who understood his journey. As the song ended, neither of them moved away immediately. "Thank you," Daniel said, the words inadequate for what he was feeling. "For what?" Sarah asked. "For making me look at you," he said simply. "For helping me see what's in front of me instead of only what's behind." The drive home was quiet, but comfortably so. They talked about small things, favorite books, Emma's upcoming science fair, a new restaurant in town they'd both been meaning to try. The weight of their earlier conversation remained, but it had transformed into something lighter, a shared understanding that didn't need constant acknowledgement. When they reached Sarah's house, Daniel walked her to her door, an unexpected nervousness fluttering in his chest. "I had a really nice time tonight," Sarah said, keys in hand. "Much better than I expected." "Me too," Daniel agreed. I'm glad Emma told me about your offer." Sarah smiled. "Your daughter seems to have good instincts." "She gets that from her mother," Daniel said, and was surprised to find the words didn't bring the usual pang of sadness. A moment of silence stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" Daniel asked suddenly. "With Emma and me, I mean. As a thank you for the ride. And the company." Sarah's expression brightened. "I'd like that very much." "Great," Daniel said, relief and anticipation mingling in his voice. "I'll text you." "I'll be waiting," Sarah replied, a gentle teasing in her tone. As Daniel walked the short distance to his own house, he felt lighter than he had in years. The night air was cool against his face, the stars bright overhead. He thought of Melissa, as he often did in quiet moments, but the memory brought a bittersweet warmth rather than the usual ache. "I'm trying," he whispered to the night sky. "I'm learning to live again." When he reached his front door, he turned and looked back at Sarah's house. A light was on in what he guessed was her living room, a warm glow in the darkness. He thought of her words on the dance floor, "Look at me," and felt something unfurl in his chest, like a flower turning toward the sun. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a fairy tale ending. It was something quieter, more tentative, a first step on a new path, a whispered possibility. Daniel didn't know where it might lead, but for the first time in 5 years, he was curious to find out. The next morning, as Daniel made coffee and waited for Emma to return from her sleepover, his phone chimed with a text message. "Good morning," Sarah had written. "I'm making too many blueberry muffins for one person. Any chance you and Emma might help me eat them? They're best warm from the oven." Daniel smiled at the screen, feeling a flutter of anticipation. He thought of what Emma had said about him needing to meet people, about needing more in his life than just work and routine. His daughter, it seemed, was wiser than he'd given her credit for. "We'd love to," he typed back. "Emma should be home in about an hour." Sarah's reply came quickly, "Perfect. The door will be open." As Daniel set his phone down, he caught sight of a photograph on the kitchen counter, him and Melissa on their wedding day, both laughing at something now forgotten. For a moment, he studied her face, the joy radiating from her eyes. "I think you'd approve," he said softly to the image. "I think you'd want this for me." And for the first time, he truly believed it was true. When Emma returned home, bubbling with stories from her sleepover, Daniel told her about the wedding, about Sarah's invitation, and When Emma returned home, bubbling with stories from her sleepover. Daniel told her about the wedding, about Sarah's invitation, and watched as his daughter's expression shifted from surprise to barely contained excitement. "So you actually talked to Mrs. Rodriguez?" Emma asked, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. "Like, had a real conversation?" "We did," Daniel confirmed, amused by her reaction. "And she's invited us over for blueberry muffins this morning, if you're interested." Emma's eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Wait," she narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Did you tell her I'd be home? Because if this is some kind of setup." Daniel laughed, the sound surprising even himself. "It's not a setup, Em. She just made too many muffins and thought we might like some." "Right," Emma said, clearly unconvinced. "And this has nothing to do with the fact that she's really nice and pretty and makes those amazing cookies at Christmas?" "The muffins are blueberry, not chocolate chip," Daniel pointed out, deliberately missing her point. Emma rolled her eyes. "Fine, play dumb. But I need 15 minutes to shower and change. I'm not meeting our neighbor looking like this." She gestured to her rumpled sleepover clothes and messy hair. As Emma thundered up the stairs, Daniel found himself smiling. His daughter's transparent enthusiasm should have made him nervous, but somehow it didn't. Instead, he felt a quiet anticipation, a gentle curiosity about what might unfold. Exactly 17 minutes later, they stood on Sarah's front porch. Emma, freshly showered and changed into a casual but carefully selected outfit, nudged him. "Knock, Dad." She said the door would be open, Daniel replied, hesitating with his hand raised. "You can't just walk into someone's house," Emma insisted. "That's weird." Before they could resolve this debate, the door swung open, and Sarah stood there, flour dusting her cheek and a warm smile lighting her face. "I thought I heard voices," she said. Come in, come in." The muffins just came out of the oven. The scent of fresh baking enveloped them as they stepped inside. Sarah's home was cozy and inviting, bookshelves lining the walls, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation, and large windows letting in streams of morning sunlight. It felt lived in and warm, so different from their own house that sometimes still felt like a showroom despite their years there. "Your home is beautiful," Daniel said, meaning it. "Thanks," Sarah replied. "It's taken some time to make it feel like mine, but I'm getting there." There was a depth to her words that Daniel understood immediately, the challenge of creating a space that honored the past while making room for the present. "Emma, it's so nice to finally meet you properly," Sarah continued, turning to his daughter. "Your dad mentioned you had a science fair coming up." Emma lit up, launching into an explanation of her project on sustainable urban water systems. Daniel watched in amazement as Sarah asked thoughtful questions, clearly engaged and genuinely interested. His daughter, normally reserved with adults she didn't know well, was animated and enthusiastic. In the kitchen, they gathered around a small table by a bay window overlooking Sarah's garden. The muffins were indeed delicious, bursting with blueberries and topped with a crumbly streusel that Emma immediately declared life-changing. "These are amazing," Daniel agreed, savoring the warm, buttery flavor. "Where did you learn to bake like this?" "My grandmother," Sarah said, pouring coffee for herself and Daniel, and offering Emma juice. "She was from Puerto Rico and believed food was the best way to show love. I spent every summer with her until I was 16, just cooking and baking and listening to her stories. My mom tried to teach me to cook," Daniel admitted. "But I was more interested in building things than making them edible." "Dad can barely make toast without setting off the smoke alarm," Emma stage whispered to Sarah, who laughed. "Hey, I make a mean grilled cheese," Daniel protested. "When you don't burn it," Emma countered. Sarah watched their banter with warm eyes. "My husband was the same way. Miguel could perform complex medical procedures but somehow managed to ruin boxed macaroni and cheese." Instead of the awkward silence that usually followed any mention of departed spouses, Emma leaned forward, curious. "You were married to a doctor?" A surgeon, Sarah nodded. We met when I was a nursing student doing my clinical rotations. That's so romantic, Emma sighed. Like Grey's Anatomy. Much less dramatic, Sarah assured her with a smile. Though the hospital cafeteria food was just as bad as they show on TV. As they talked, the morning stretched into afternoon. Emma discovered Sarah's collection of medical textbooks and was soon peppering her with questions about nursing and healthcare. Daniel found himself drawn into a conversation about the garden visible through the window, Sarah's ongoing project to create a sustainable native plant landscape. I'd love to show you, she offered, and soon they were walking through the backyard, Sarah pointing out different plants and explaining her vision for the space. I've been thinking about putting a small patio here, she said, indicating a sunny corner. But I'm not sure about the design. I could help with that, Daniel offered before he could second-guess himself. Draw up some plans, if you'd like. Sarah's smile was warm and genuine. I'd like that very much. From inside, Emma called that she'd found Sarah's collection of medical dramas on her bookshelf and wanted to know if she could borrow one. As Sarah went to help her, Daniel remained in the garden, looking around at the thoughtfully arranged plants, the bird feeders, the small stone path winding through it all. It was a space created with care and intention, much like Sarah herself seemed to approach life. When they finally said their goodbyes hours later, with promises to have dinner together the following weekend, Daniel felt a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just about Sarah, though her presence in his life already felt significant. It was about opening himself to new connections, new experiences, to living fully again. Over the weeks that followed, Sarah became a regular presence in their lives. She joined them for movie nights and helped Emma with her science project. Daniel designed her garden patio, and they spent weekends bringing it to life, with Emma appointed as the official supervisor and lemonade provider. There were challenges, of course. The first time Daniel found himself laughing uncontrollably at one of Sarah's stories about hospital mishaps, he was overcome with guilt afterward, as if joy were somehow a betrayal. Sarah understood without him having to explain, sharing her own experiences with grief's unexpected ambushes. It gets easier, she told him one evening as they sat on her newly completed patio, watching the sunset after Emma had gone inside to finish homework. Not the missing them, that never really goes away. But the guilt does, eventually. You learn that being happy again doesn't erase what you had before. 3 months after the wedding, Daniel invited Sarah to dinner at their house, just the two of them, while Emma was at a friend's birthday sleepover. He spent hours preparing, following a recipe his mother had given him with painstaking precision. When Sarah arrived, she brought a bottle of wine and a nervous smile that matched his own. The air between them hummed with unspoken anticipation. I have a confession, Daniel said as they sat down to eat. This is the first time I've cooked for anyone other than Emma since Melissa died. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. I'm honored, she said simply. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where photographs of Melissa still held places of honor alongside newer images of Emma's recent activities. Sarah studied them with gentle interest. She was beautiful, she said, looking at a picture of Melissa laughing on a beach, her hair blowing in the wind. Emma has her smile. She does, Daniel agreed, standing beside her. Melissa would have loved you, you know. She always said I needed more people in my life who wouldn't let me take myself too seriously. Sarah turned to face him, her expression open and vulnerable. And Miguel would have approved of you. He always told me that if anything happened to him, he wanted me to find someone kind. The moment stretched between them, heavy with meaning. Daniel took a deep breath. Sarah, I don't know exactly what this is between us, but I know it matters to me. You matter to me. You matter to me too, she replied softly. More than I expected. More than I thought possible again. When he kissed her, it felt both entirely new and somehow familiar, like coming home to a place he'd never been before. There was sadness mingled with the joy, acknowledgement of all they had lost woven into this new beginning. But mostly, there was gratitude, for second chances, for unexpected connections, for the courage to look forward instead of back. 6 months later, as they celebrated Emma's 17th birthday in the backyard that connected their two homes, the fence now removed to create one larger shared space, Daniel watched as his daughter laughed with Sarah's sister and nieces, now regular fixtures in their expanding family circle. Sarah appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about how much has changed," he said, squeezing her hand. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined any of this." "Life has a way of surprising us," Sarah agreed. "Sometimes in the most ordinary ways." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Emma approached them, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I have something for you guys," she said, handing them an envelope. Inside was a photograph, one Daniel didn't recognize. It showed him and Sarah at the wedding where they'd first connected, dancing together on the crowded floor. Their expressions were focused entirely on each other, oblivious to the camera and everyone around them. "Aunt Lisa sent it to me," Emma explained. "She thought I might want it." Daniel stared at the image, remembering that moment when Sarah had whispered, "Look at me," and everything had changed. In the photograph, he could see it happening, the walls coming down, the possibility taking root. "Thank you, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is precious." Emma shrugged, trying to appear casual though her eyes shone with happiness. "I just thought you should have it. You know, for when you tell your story someday." Later that night, as Daniel and Sarah sat on the patio under a sky full of stars, the photograph resting between them, he found himself thinking about stories, how they end, how they begin, how they continue in ways we never expect. "Do you ever wonder," he asked softly, "if they somehow knew? Melissa and Miguel. If they somehow guided us toward each other?" Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I like to think they'd be happy for us. That they'd understand this isn't replacing what we had with them, but building something new that honors them too." Daniel nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle in his heart. Their story wasn't about forgetting or replacing. It was about remembering and continuing, about finding the courage to look up from grief and see the possibility of joy again. "Look at me," Sarah had whispered that night on the dance floor. Such simple words, but they had changed everything. They had invited him to see not just her, but himself, to recognize that his heart, though scarred, was still capable of connection, still open to love. As they sat together under the vast night sky, Daniel knew with quiet certainty that this was just the beginning of their story. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and grief revisited. But there would also be joy, connection, and the daily miracle of choosing to move forward together. And that, he thought as Sarah's hand found his in the darkness, was a story worth living. If this story touched your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Life's most beautiful moments often come when we least expect them, in the ordinary spaces between heartbreak and healing. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to look up and truly see the person standing right in front of you.